I never thought I'd be the kind of man to find himself in a situation like this. Faithful to a fault, devoted to my family, the kind of husband who believed in vows and commitment. I had always considered marriage sacred, until the night my wife, Julia, sat me down at our dining table, folded her hands neatly, and looked me dead in the eye with a request that turned my world upside down. "I want an open marriage," she said, as if she were merely suggesting we switch from coffee to tea in the mornings. At first, I laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke. But Julia didn't laugh with me. Her expression remained composed, her lips pressed into a tight line, her fingers fidgeting with the wedding ring she had once cherished. "What?" I finally asked, my voice hollow. "I need more excitement," she continued, her tone light, as if she were reading off a grocery list. "I love you, of course. I always will. But I want freedom. And I don't want to hide it from you." The word freedom tasted like acid in my mouth. What had I been all these years? A cage? A prison? She leaned forward, her dark eyes shimmering with an eagerness that made me sick. "And I want to be able to bring my partners home. Here." I recoiled, feeling as though she'd reached across the table and slapped me. "Our home," I repeated, disbelief thick in my voice. Julia nodded, as if this was some civilized negotiation, as if she weren't asking me to shatter the very foundation of our life together. "You can do the same," she offered, as though that made it better. "It's only fair." But that was the problem, wasn't it? I couldn't do the same. I was incapable of betraying my vows, even with her explicit permission. "Absolutely not," I said, pushing my chair back so violently that it scraped against the hardwood floor. "Julia, this is insane. You want to bring other men into our house? Into our bed?" She sighed, as if exhausted by my resistance. "I was hoping you'd understand," she said, shaking her head. "I thought maybe, if you saw how much this meant to me, you'd be willing to try." "Try?" I choked out a bitter laugh. "You think I can just turn off everything I feel? That I can sit back and watch while my wife—" I stopped myself before the words turned to rage. "She didn't fight me. She didn't plead. She just sat there, waiting for me to either accept it or walk away. And the worst part? Our daughter, Emily, overheard it all. The next day, she took her mother's side. The betrayal deepened. And then, that very night, Julia brought him home. The next evening, I came home to find my world completely unrecognizable. I had spent the entire day in a fog, my mind looping over the conversation with Julia like a song stuck on repeat. I still couldn't process it, couldn't believe she had even suggested such a thing. An open marriage. In our house. I wanted to believe that she would change her mind, that she would see the pain in my eyes and take it back. That this was some midlife crisis, some fleeting madness she would wake up from. But when I walked through the front door that night, I knew immediately that my nightmare had already begun. The smell of cologne, not mine, hung in the air. The faint hum of laughter drifted from the living room. My stomach twisted as I dropped my bag by the door, each step forward feeling heavier than the last. Then I saw them. Julia and him. A tall, lean man with dark hair, sitting comfortably on my couch, a glass of whiskey in his hand like he had lived there for years. He turned his head slightly when he saw me, but he didn't flinch. He didn't even have the decency to look guilty. And Julia? She sat right beside him, legs crossed, looking as relaxed as ever. Like this was normal. Like I was the guest in my own home. "Hey," she said casually, as if I had just walked in from the office like any other night. "This is Ryan." I couldn't speak. My throat was dry, my hands trembling at my sides. Ryan stood up, extending his hand toward me like a damn business transaction. "Hey, man," he said, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. I did not take his hand. Instead, I turned to Julia, my voice shaking with barely controlled rage. You're actually doing this. She tilted her head, as if I was the one being unreasonable. We talked about this, she said. I told you I wasn't going to hide anything. I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth might crack. And that makes it better. My voice was low, dangerous. That makes it okay to bring him here. Ryan, the smug bastard, chuckled. He actually chuckled. Look, man, I don't want any drama. I turned to him so fast he took a step back. This is my house, I said, my voice like steel. This is my family. And you, I jabbed a finger at him, my vision turning red. You are nothing but a mistake my wife is making. Julia sighed and stood up, placing herself between us, as if I was the one who needed to be calmed down. We agreed, she said firmly. You had the chance to do the same. If you don't want to take advantage of it, that's your choice. But I will. And then, the final knife in my back. From the top of the stairs, our daughter's voice. Dad, stop making this a big deal. I looked up, and there she was, Emily, my own daughter, leaning against the railing with her arms crossed, looking at me like I was the problem. Like I was ruining this. My heart sank to the floor. I had lost them both. Without another word, I turned around, walked upstairs, and packed a bag. I wasn't going to spend another second in this house of betrayal. I don't even remember how I packed my bag. My hands moved on their own, grabbing essentials, clothes, toiletries, my laptop, while my mind was stuck in a whirlwind of rage and disbelief. This wasn't just a bad dream, it was my life. And it was crumbling right in front of me. As I zipped up my suitcase, I heard footsteps approaching. Julia. Are you seriously doing this? She asked, leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed. I turned to face her, the woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, and for the first time, I realized something painful. She wasn't mine anymore. Maybe she never had been. I should be asking you that, I shot back. Are you seriously throwing away our marriage for some random guy? Julia sighed, rubbing her temples like I was exhausting her. Like I was the problem. It's not just about Ryan, she said, and I hated how soft her voice had become, like she was trying to make me understand. It's about what I need. What I deserve. I laughed bitterly. What you deserve. She nodded, stepping into the room like she had any right to be there. I've spent years being a wife and a mother, always putting you and Emily first. I love you, I do. But I want more. More. That word bounced around in my skull, rattling something deep inside me. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. And what about me, Julia? What do I deserve? She hesitated. And that hesitation told me everything. I nodded slowly. That's what I thought. I grabbed my suitcase and moved past her, but she reached out, her fingers grazing my wrist. Where are you even going? She asked, and for the first time, her voice cracked. I met her gaze, and for a split second, I saw something human in her expression. Maybe regret. Maybe doubt. Maybe she never thought I'd actually leave. But it was too late for second thoughts. I pulled my arm away. Anywhere but here. She didn't stop me. She just let me go. I walked out of that house without looking back. The night air was sharp against my skin, but I barely felt it. My heart was hammering in my chest, my mind racing, but there was one thought that drowned out everything else. This was it. My marriage was over. My family, broken. I threw my suitcase into the trunk, got into my car, and just drove. I didn't have a plan, no destination in mind. I only knew that I couldn't stay in that house another second, breathing the same air as my wife's lover, under the same roof as my daughter who had taken her mother's side without hesitation. The betrayal burned. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. How had things gotten so twisted? How had Julia, the woman who once swore she'd stand by me forever, become someone I didn't even recognize? And Emily. God. I had thought, at the very least, my daughter would understand. That she would see how wrong this was. But she didn't. She had defended her mother. Defended that man being in our house. That hurt more than anything. I kept driving. Past the familiar streets, past the neighborhood we had called home for years, past the places where memories of happier days lingered like ghosts. At some point, I ended up at a cheap roadside motel just off the highway. The neon sign flickered as I pulled into the parking lot, exhaustion finally creeping in now that the adrenaline had begun to wear off. I sat in the car for a long moment, staring blankly at the dashboard. This is real. I'm no longer a husband. No longer a man with a home. I'm just, alone. I exhaled sharply, grabbed my bag, and headed inside. The woman at the front desk barely looked up as she slid a key across the counter. "Room 207, she mumbled. I nodded, took the key, and walked up the stairs. The room was as depressing as I expected, stained carpet, outdated furniture, a flickering lamp in the corner. But it didn't matter. I wasn't here for comfort. I dropped my bag, sat on the edge of the bed, and just stared at the wall. I should have been angry. Furious. But all I felt was, empty. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Julia. I let it ring. Then came another. Emily. I clenched my jaw. They had made their choice. And I had made mine. For the first time in my life, I was truly, completely on my own. And I had no idea what came next. I barely slept that night. I lay on the stiff motel mattress, staring at the ceiling, my mind a mess of anger, regret, and disbelief. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Julia's face. Calm. Unapologetic. Like she had simply asked me to pass the salt at dinner, not rip our marriage to shreds. And Emily, my own daughter, siding with her. That was the part that hurt the most. By the time the sun rose, I felt like I hadn't rested at all. I got up, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. I looked like hell, dark circles under my eyes, jaw clenched so tight I could barely relax it. What now? I had no plan. No home. No idea what to do next. I had always been the kind of man who followed a routine. Wake up, work, come home, spend time with my family. I liked knowing where I stood, what my purpose was. Now, I was adrift. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I ignored it. I already knew who it was. Julia had called twice last night. Emily once. I hadn't answered. What was there to say? I grabbed my keys, checked out of the motel, and got into my car. I needed to do something. Sitting around, wallowing in my misery, wasn't going to help. I drove aimlessly for a while, just letting the road stretch out in front of me. The town felt different now, like it didn't belong to me anymore. Eventually, I pulled into a diner just off the highway. A quiet place, not too crowded. I ordered a black coffee and a plate of eggs I wasn't hungry for. And that's when she walked in. At first, I didn't notice her. I was too lost in my own head, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly. But then, she sat down at the counter, just a few seats away. Long brown hair. Soft, tired eyes. A look of someone carrying her own burden. I don't know why I kept staring. Maybe because she looked as out of place as I felt. Then, she glanced my way and caught me looking. For a split second, I thought she might be annoyed. But instead, she offered a small, knowing smile. Like she recognized something in me. And just like that, my life started to change again. She held my gaze for a second longer than expected before turning back to the menu in front of her. I should have looked away. Should have gone back to staring at my coffee, lost in my own misery. But something about her kept my attention. She wasn't flashy or overly made up like Julia. There was a quietness to her, something real. And maybe that's what I needed right then, something real. The waitress came over and took her order. "Just coffee," she said, her voice soft but steady. I hadn't realized I was still watching her until she turned toward me again, arching an eyebrow. "You okay over there?" she asked, half amused, half curious. I blinked, feeling like an idiot. "Yeah," I muttered, shaking my head. "Sorry, just, long night." She studied me for a moment before giving a small nod, like she understood. "Yeah," she said. "I get that." She didn't offer more, and neither did I. We sat in mutual silence, two strangers drinking coffee in a nowhere diner, both pretending we weren't completely lost. But after a few minutes, she spoke again. "You don't look like you're from around here," she said, stirring her coffee. "I'm not," I admitted. "Just passing through." She hummed like she didn't quite believe me. "Passing through, huh? Looks more like you're running from something." That caught me off guard. I let out a short, humorless laugh. "That obvious?" She shrugged. "I know the look." I frowned, studying her now. "So, what are you running from?" She hesitated, fingers tightening around her cup. Then, after a long pause, she sighed. "A man who made me feel invisible," she said simply. I didn't know what to say to that. Because I understood it. I understood it too well. For the first time in days, the weight on my chest felt just a little bit lighter. We sat there, two strangers in a quiet diner, sipping coffee like we weren't both trying to escape something. I should have kept to myself. Should have finished my drink, paid my bill, and left. But instead, I found myself saying, "I know that feeling." She glanced at me over the rim of her cup. "Yeah." I nodded, gripping my mug a little tighter. Spent the last few years feeling invisible in my own marriage. She exhaled a short, knowing laugh. "Let me guess. She stopped looking at you like she used to. Stopped caring about the little things." I smirked, shaking my head. Try inviting another man into our house and expecting me to be okay with it. Her hand froze on her coffee cup. For a second, I thought I'd said too much. But then, instead of shock or pity, she gave me a look I didn't expect. Recognition. She set her mug down, tilting her head slightly. "She really did that?" I nodded, feeling the bitterness rise in my throat. Told me she wanted an open marriage. Gave me the option to do the same, like that would somehow make it fair. I let out a humorless laugh. Like I could ever just flip a switch and stop being faithful. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, finally, she muttered, "Sounds familiar." That caught my attention. I leaned forward slightly. "Let me guess. Your ex traded loyalty for freedom too?" She huffed. "Something like that." I didn't push. I could tell she wasn't the kind of person who gave out details easily. We sat in silence for a while, letting the conversation settle. The diner buzzed softly around us, clinking silverware, murmured conversations, the hum of the coffee machine. But between us, there was a strange kind of understanding. I didn't even know her name, and yet, I felt like she got me in a way that no one else had in a long time. After a few minutes, she turned toward me, studying me like she was debating something. Then she said, "You got a place to go?" The question caught me off guard. I should have lied. Should have said yes. But instead, I shook my head. "Not really," I admitted. She nodded like she already knew the answer. Then, after a long pause, she took a deep breath and said, come with me. I blinked, sure I had misheard her. Come with you? I repeated slowly. She nodded, stirring what was left of her coffee. Not forever. Just, for a while. I studied her, trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. You don't even know me. She smirked, but there was something sad behind it. I don't have to. I know what it looks like when someone's got nowhere else to go. I exhaled, leaning back in my seat. This was insane. A day ago, I had a house. A wife. A daughter. A life. Now, I was sitting in a roadside diner, getting invited to go, where? With who? I eyed her cautiously. What's the catch? She let out a short laugh, shaking her head. No catch. Just two people who don't want to be alone right now. Something about the way she said it made my chest tighten. She wasn't just offering me a place to crash. She was running from something too. I looked at her, really looked at her. The tired eyes. The way she kept her guard up. The way she spoke like someone who had been hurt before. I didn't even know her name. But I knew the feeling in her voice. I could say no. I could go back to my car, find another cheap motel, and wake up tomorrow just as lost as I was today. Or I could take a chance. A reckless, stupid, desperate chance. I took a deep breath. Where are we going? She gave me a small, knowing smile. Somewhere far from here. I should have said no. Every rational part of me screamed that this was crazy, that I was about to get into a car with a complete stranger, that I had no idea where we were going, that my life was already in free fall and this could only make it worse. But then I thought about the alternative. Sitting alone in another motel room, staring at the ceiling. Letting Julia's betrayal eat away at me, reliving the moment I saw him sitting on my couch, in my home, like he belonged there. The truth was, I had nothing left to lose. So I looked at her, this woman who had her own ghosts, her own reasons for leaving, and I nodded. Let's go. Her expression didn't change. She just slid a few bills under her coffee cup, grabbed her bag, and stood up. You got a car? She asked. I nodded. Good, she said. Follow me. We walked out of the diner together, the early morning sun casting long shadows on the pavement. For the first few miles, we drove in silence. She led the way in an old Jeep, taking back roads instead of highways, as if she was avoiding something. Or someone. I didn't ask questions. Not yet. But eventually, when we stopped at a gas station, I leaned against my car and finally said, I don't even know your name. She smiled, just a little. Lena, she said. I nodded. I know, she interrupted. Saw the name on your credit card when you paid. That caught me off guard. You were paying attention to that? I pay attention to everything, she said simply. I watched her for a moment, trying to read her. But she was good at keeping her walls up. So I just nodded and said, all right, Lena. Where exactly are we going? She tilted her head, considering her answer. Then she said, somewhere neither of us have to look back. And for the first time since I left my house, since my world fell apart, that actually sounded like a good idea. We kept driving. The miles stretched out behind us, the past shrinking in the rearview mirror like it had never even happened. Neither of us spoke much. We didn't need to. There was an unspoken understanding between us, two people who had been thrown away, two people who were just trying to find solid ground again. Somewhere around sunset, we stopped at a small roadside motel. Nothing fancy, just another anonymous place where no one asked questions. Lena tossed her bag onto the bed in her room and let out a slow breath. So, she said, turning to me. You going to tell me what's next for you? I let out a bitter laugh. That's the thing. I have no damn idea. She nodded like she understood. Then, after a moment, she sat down on the bed and said something I didn't expect. "You deserve better, you know." I blinked, caught off guard. "What?" She shrugged. "Your wife. That guy. The whole situation. It wasn't about you. People like that, they convince themselves they're owed something. That their own selfishness is some kind of personal growth. But that doesn't mean you deserved it." I swallowed hard. No one had said that to me yet. For so long, I had been drowning in my own anger, my own shame. Wondering if there was something I could have done differently, if maybe I had failed Julia somehow. But hearing Lena say it, just like that. It felt like something inside me shifted. Like maybe, just maybe, she was right. I sat down in the chair across from her, rubbing a hand over my face. "What about you?" I asked. "What are you running from?" She exhaled, looking away. "A mistake," she said finally. "One I don't want to make again." I didn't push. We sat there in silence, the room dimly lit by the flickering motel lamp, the weight of the world pressing down on both of us. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if I would ever go back, if I would ever try to fix what had been broken, or if I would just keep driving until the past couldn't find me anymore. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel completely alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.